The marble floors are cold against your bare feet, though the palace is heavy with perfumed air. You are led forward, pushed by hands you cannot see, only hear. The shuffle of soft slippers, the creak of iron doors closing behind you. Incense hangs in the corridors, meant to mask the sour odor of sweat and fear, but it only sharpens the nausea rising in your chest. The murmur of eunuchs drifts like low thunder, their words too quiet to catch, their presence too powerful to defy. "Do not look up," one whispers. You obey, but in that command lies the truth. You are one of many, a number, a possession, part of a procession that has passed through these corridors for centuries. Behind velvet curtains waits not desire, but ritual, not love, but system. 7 layers deep, each one more perverted, more calculated, more cruel than the last. And outside, the world marvels at the empire's beauty. The domes of mosques rise like celestial crowns, minarets pierce the skies, soldiers march in triumph across 3 continents. To outsiders, this palace is glory carved in stone. But here, behind its silken walls, the true story is darker buried, yet preserved in the shadows of history. If these shadows unsettle you, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It fuels more unearthings like this, bringing forgotten voices back into the light. The Ottoman Empire was no fleeting dynasty. For 6 centuries, it stretched across 3 continents, ruling tens of millions of lives with precision and force. Its palaces and mosques dazzled the world, yet within those walls the harem functioned not as chaotic indulgence, but as an organized machine of domination. This was no accident of lust, no hidden corner of private vice. Chroniclers, imperial ledgers, and court orders make clear, what unfolded inside the harem was policy structured, regulated, and preserved through law. Behind every veil and jeweled curtain lay a deliberate system designed to extract loyalty, obedience, and submission. The palace was not merely a home. It was a factory of power, where human intimacy itself was weaponized, transformed into ritual, and recorded with the same precision as taxes and military campaigns. The first step into the Ottoman harem was not gilded curtains or jeweled fountains. It was a marketplace. For the victims, the horror began with selection and sorting. Imagine the scene after a border raid in the Balkans or the Caucasus. Entire villages rounded up, marched for days until the survivors stumbled into an open square. Mothers clutching daughters, boys dragged from their fathers, the elderly collapsing on the roadside, left for dead. Chroniclers describe how captives were lined up like cattle, inspected under the glare of appointed officials. Beauty was not admired, it was calculated. Age, height, the clarity of skin, the curve of a neck, all entered into ledgers with chilling precision. One record notes bluntly, 15 females, aged 16 to 20, excellent condition. No names, no identities, only numbers and categories, listed alongside sacks of grain and bolts of silk. Mothers were sometimes forced to stand beside their daughters, compelled to watch as strangers assessed the value of flesh and potential. The psychological cruelty was deliberate, to break both bonds at once. Even soldiers who carried out the raids were rewarded based on quality of captives delivered, turning human lives into bonuses on the battlefield. What followed stripped away not just freedom, but identity itself. The moment a girl was chosen, her past began to vanish. Names, those intimate anchors of self, were the first to go. A Katerina or Mariam from the Balkans might become Gulbahar, Mahidevran, or another name chosen by court officials. In Ottoman registers, these were not just disguises but replacements, designed to erase memory and origin. Conversion followed, staged as ritual. In palace chambers, captives were washed, clothed in Ottoman silks, and instructed to recite prayers in languages they did not yet understand. Some resisted silently, their lips unmoving as clerics pronounced them converted. But resistance meant little. Records show the ceremony's completion was declared regardless of belief. Archaeologists have uncovered the foundations of conversion halls within palace complexes, narrow chambers where water basins and iron fittings suggest both purification and restraint. For the empire, religion was a tool, not salvation. It offered legitimacy to domination, a way to fold the conquered into the sultan's household while severing them from their ancestral roots. From that moment on, the girl's life was not her own. She was Ottoman now, by decree, not by choice. Once inside the harem's walls, the process of transformation became even more invasive. The body itself became property of the state, regulated with bureaucratic attention. Diet was the first tool. Kitchen records from Topkap Kamas, palace detail meals prescribed not for sustenance, but for shaping. Some girls were fattened deliberately to match Ottoman ideals of beauty. Others were starved into fragile delicacy. Honey, almonds, and pomegranates appear frequently, listed in rations designed to alter skin, hair, and fertility. Pharmacological control followed. Physicians of the court prepared elixirs, mixtures of goat's milk, Yemeni spices, and powdered roots. Some were stimulants, designed to enhance vitality. Others were sedatives, quieting rebellion, inducing pliancy. Chroniclers hint at aphrodisiacs slipped into drinks, blurring consent until obedience seemed natural. But the most disturbing were the records of pregnancy cycles. Surviving ledgers tracked menstruation and fertility with the cold precision of livestock management. Conceived in spring, miscarried in autumn. Delivered male, 2 stillbirths. These were not medical notes of care. They were economic tallies, measuring a woman's worth in offspring, in dynastic potential, in loyalty secured through motherhood. Inside the palace, girls were taught to bow, to walk at precise angles, to lower their eyes in exact degrees. Their very posture was regulated. Failure to meet these expectations brought humiliation, sometimes even starvation or confinement. The body became an instrument, tuned and retuned until it performed as required by ritual. For those trapped within these marble walls, survival meant not merely existing but surrendering control of one's most intimate rhythms, eating, sleeping, bleeding, birthing, all calculated, all watched. And yet, this was only the beginning. What followed pushed deeper, not just into the body, but into the soul itself. Within the harem, discipline was never left to chance. Obedience was drilled into ritual, repeated until it became instinct. Girls were made to rehearse bows hundreds of times, their foreheads brushing marble floors until skin split and bruised. The exact angle of a nod, the speed of rising from kneel to stand, each detail was scrutinized by stern matrons. One chronicler records the Rule of 43, a list of permitted words for novices. Beyond those, silence was demanded. To speak outside this narrow vocabulary risked punishment days without food or confinement in dark chambers beneath the palace. The restriction was not just silence, it was erasure, a systematic reduction of voice until only ritualized phrases remained. Mirrors were used as tools of indoctrination. Venetian glass imported at immense cost was not for beauty, but for surveillance. Girls were forced to sit surrounded by mirrors, every movement reflected endlessly. Even in solitude, they could not escape their own gaze. The message was clear. The Sultan's eye was everywhere, even inside themselves. Humiliation became a cycle of internal policing, breaking resistance by making captives complicit in their own control. The most effective weapon of empire was not the whip or the chain, it was the breaking of the mind. Families were deliberately torn apart at the point of capture. Mothers separated from children, sisters split between different households. Chroniclers describe women collapsing in grief, clawing at stone floors as their daughters were dragged away, voices drowned by the sound of iron doors. In some regions, parents scarred their own children in desperate attempts to make them undesirable to raiders. Records from Balkan villages speak of mothers burning faces with oil or breaking bones, hoping to render their daughters worthless to captors. That such desperate acts became common shows the depth of terror the harem system instilled beyond the palace walls. Inside, punishment for disobedience was staged publicly. A girl refusing instruction might be bound, displayed before her peers, then denied food or water until her will bent. Others endured isolation in cells so silent that the drip of condensation became torture. The cruelty was not excess, it was design. Each act reinforced the lesson. Resistance meant destruction, compliance meant survival. Even affection was weaponized. Some captives were rewarded with trinkets or rare freedoms, then punished the moment they faltered, creating cycles of hope and despair. The empire knew that to control a body, one must first enslave the mind. Enforcers of this system were the eunuchs, men stripped of their own masculinity, tasked with ensuring the subjugation of others. Their loyalty was absolute, their authority unmatched within the palace walls. Armed not with armies, but with whips and silence, they became instruments of fear. Defiance was met with swift brutality. Whip marks across backs, confinement in iron cages, or worse, execution. The method most chilling was the sack. Women deemed dangerous, rebellious, or politically inconvenient were sewn into weighted silk bags and drowned in the Bosporus. Bloodless deaths, the empire claimed, befitting of palace honor. But behind this euphemism lay cold murder wrapped in ritual. Transportation itself carried its own horrors. Captives brought from distant lands endured voyages in holds of ships turned into floating prisons. 15% mortality was tolerated, written off in records as acceptable loss. One ledger lists spoiled grain alongside 3 deceased girls, both noted with the same dispassion. Human life reduced to spoilage. Violence was not chaos here. It was codified, instrumentalized, and perfected as a language of control. The final level was the most perverse, turning victim against victim. Within the harem, rivalry was deliberately cultivated. Women were pitted against each other in contests of loyalty, intelligence, or beauty, often staged for the amusement of higher officials. A misplaced glance, an overheard word could be twisted into betrayal. Executions became ritual spectacles. Chroniclers describe nights when the silence of the palace was broken by splashing waters. Another silken bag cast into the Bosporus, another rival erased. These acts were framed as purifications, sacrifices necessary for the stability of the realm. Religious justification wrapped the cruelty in sanctity. Imams declared loyalty to the sultan as divine, resistance as sin. The harem's rituals were recast as moral tests, their victims presented as examples of disobedience crushed by fate. In this way, perversion was not hidden. It was sanctified, woven into the fabric of empire. The cycle became self-perpetuating. Girls brought in young grew into matrons, enforcing on others the same rituals they once endured. Victims transformed into agents of the system, ensuring the machine of control never stopped. The empire's brilliance lay not in swords, but in its ability to institutionalize fear across generations. Pause and consider. Entire societies reshaped themselves around whispers of these rituals. Villages surrendered at the mere rumor of what awaited their daughters. Parents mutilated children out of love. Entire peoples bowed not to armies, but to the memory of silk bags sliding into dark waters. 7 levels deep, the harem was not a house of pleasure, but a labyrinth of ritualized control. A place where humanity was stripped away piece by piece, until only obedience remained. Step back from the marble chambers for a moment, and you see something larger taking shape. The harem was not just a prison, nor simply a household of the sultan. It was an engine of empire. What seemed like ritual and cruelty on the surface was in fact the machinery of control, perfected across centuries. Ledgers that tracked girls' ages and fertility were not scribbles of obsession. They were fiscal records. Imperial accountants calculated the economic value of each captive, measuring her worth in offspring, alliances, and loyalty. To yield 100 survivors, they might take 1,000 captives, 9 in 10 discarded, mutilated, or lost in transit. And yet the empire recorded this with the calmness of bookkeeping, acceptable wastage. Contemporary observers remarked on the precision. Venetian envoys marveled that the Ottomans organized not just armies and trade, but the very reproduction of their subjects. A girl's body was as much a commodity as sacks of grain. The system did not stumble into atrocity, it designed it. The cruelty fed itself. Victims turned into selectors, older women enforcing rules upon the younger, perpetuating the same rituals that once broke them. What began as survival twisted into complicity. The machine renewed itself with each generation, without the need for constant outside force. Even the violence was ritualized into law. One legal code recorded that sexual violation of a concubine outside the palace was punishable not as a crime of dignity, but as property damage. A fine could be levied, paid to the sultan as though she were a broken object. Rape was bureaucratized into the same category as smashing a jar of imported porcelain. The reach of the system extended far beyond the palace walls. Raids were not random, they were mapped and scheduled like harvests. Scouts marked villages for quality yields, targeting communities known for beauty, youth, or submissiveness. Seasons determined strategy: spring for Balkan raids, summer for Caucasian campaigns. Just as farmers planned their crops, the empire planned its human supply chain. And over time, the rituals became so normalized that entire societies adapted to them. Families mutilated their own kin to save them from selection. Villages negotiated surrender before armies arrived, hoping mercy might spare them the horrors they had heard whispered. Fear became tribute, and tribute became power. Pause for a moment. The true genius of empire was not in its armies, nor its palaces of stone. It was in the invisible architecture of dread, where domination seeped into the marrow of daily life. People bent to the Ottomans not simply because of conquest, but because of what awaited behind those iron doors in Topkapi. If the first revelation is that the harem was systemic, the second is that it was performative. The cruelty was not hidden, it was staged, both for those within and for those watching from afar. Public humiliations were woven into entertainment for the elite. Certain festivals included displays of harem training, young women forced to bow in endless repetition, their exhaustion met with laughter from behind jeweled screens. Other times, a rival accused of betrayal might vanish overnight, her silken bag slipping beneath the Bosporus as musicians played in the courtyards above. These acts were not aberrations, they were rituals of spectacle, warnings dressed as entertainment. Religion provided the final layer of justification. Court imams framed obedience to the Sultan as submission to God, twisting faith into sanction. Disobedience became sin, loyalty became salvation. To resist the harem's rules was to resist divine will. The machine clothed itself in piety, ensuring not only compliance, but conviction. And so the cycles deepened. Captives became enforcers. Mothers raised daughters to survive a system that had once broken them. Eunuchs, stripped of their own humanity, became the guardians of others' captivity. Every layer of ritual ensured that power reproduced itself without interruption. The irony is bitter. Outsiders, dazzled by domes, gardens, and mosaics, wrote odes to the empire's magnificence. Travelers described the scent of roses drifting from palace walls, unaware it masked the screams within. Glory was measured in architecture and conquest, never in the invisible toll of silenced lives. Consider the scale. Tens of thousands of women cycled through these rituals across centuries. Entire lineages extinguished or warped, entire cultures scarred. What began as conquest hardened into an institution, so entrenched that by the 17th century it seemed as natural as sunrise. The system no longer needed justification. It simply was. That is the most chilling truth. Not the sack in the river, not the lash of the eunuch's whip, but the normalization of atrocity. Once ritualized, cruelty becomes invisible. Once codified, it becomes tradition. And once sanctified, it becomes destiny. Generations were born and died believing this was the natural order. Daughters whispered warnings to younger sisters. Mothers prayed not for freedom but for survival within the walls. When oppression becomes the only imaginable reality, resistance itself begins to fade. That was the machine's greatest victory, not in silencing voices, but in convincing people there was nothing to say. And as the centuries passed, the empire sustained itself not only through armies and treaties, but through the quiet terror of rituals repeated, 7 levels deep, in the hidden heart of Topkapi Palace. History often leaves behind ruins of stone arches, mosaics, domes that gleam in sunlight. But there are ruins less visible, etched not in marble but in memory, in silence, in the scars of families broken. The Ottoman Harem was one such ruin, not a chamber of romance, as later Orientalist painting suggested, but a system of ritualized control that weaponized intimacy and sanctified terror. When we speak of empires, we often speak of armies, borders, treaties. Yet what made the Ottoman machine endure for 6 centuries was not just steel or gunpowder. It was its ability to normalize the unthinkable, to take cruelty, repeat it until it became ritual, and then record it as policy. The harem shows us how power can make the most intimate parts of human life, love, family, the body itself, tools of domination. And the echoes remain. In folklore whispered through Balkan villages, in genealogies that vanish abruptly, entire family lines extinguished, in genetic traces that connect peoples across continents, legacies of forced unions and stolen childhoods. For some, this history is not distant. It lives in cultural memory, in songs, in stories murmured across generations, heavy with grief. The archives endure as well. Imperial ledgers, tax scrolls, chroniclers' notes, all written with cold precision. They remind us that for every silken curtain admired in a museum, there were countless names erased beneath it. Numbers entered in margins where once lived daughters, sisters, mothers. The empire may have fallen, but its records preserve the testimony of lives measured, weighed, and broken. What can we take from these shadows? That civilization is fragile. That power, left unchecked, bends even intimacy into ritualized cruelty. That behind every glorious monument lies another story, one carved not in stone but in suffering. Remembering these truths does not weaken history, it humanizes it. It restores dignity to those who were denied it in life. And so, as you leave these corridors of memory, pause. Listen for the footsteps that once echoed across marble floors, the whispers of girls told never to look up, the splash of silken bags cast into dark waters. They are gone, but their silence speaks still. If this history stirs you, subscribe and share in the comments where it hit hardest. Together, we'll continue to confront the truths empires tried to bury and give voice to the forgotten shadows of our past.